No, good morning, everyone. So I do know that it's 9:40, and some of you would rather be in bed right now. I can relate to that, don't worry. But I'm going to try and keep this fairly upbeat for you, so you can follow this through, because otherwise, it's a tall order otherwise. So a bit about me. Yes, my name's Rhammel, born and raised in London. Pronouns are he, him, or they, them. Today, I'm wearing black boots, black trousers, and a green shirt and some glasses. So that's me today. I thought I'd give you an audio description as well. Yes, I am the head of youth activism at Bite Back. One of the things I didn't plan was needing to have three hands. One to change the slides. So I'm here today to talk to you a bit about Gen Z, but also Gen Alpha, because of course they're careering towards 18. So the oldest Gen Alphas are now 14 at the moment. So they're careering towards 18, and so we should probably think about them today as well. And of course their role in social and political change, the role that they should have in political and social change. So I started on my own social action journey about 2 decades ago. I'm 30, so a bit of quick maths. I was 11 when I started my journey. And for me, it was always about campaigning, a deep impending need to challenge the injustices that I saw in the world. You might be thinking, well, surely, just surely, I was an exception and not the rule. But you'd be wrong for thinking that then, and I think even more wrong for thinking that now. What set me apart from others wasn't anything other than opportunity. For me, it was quite clear that my peers really had a general consciousness of the issues that affected them, and of course had a lot of empathy for others. And all of what I know now tells me that young people may not be infused by formal political process, but they've never been more aware of the social issues that affect them, their peers, and their communities. They're not just aware of their lived experiences, but the environment that shapes them. You may have noticed a sharp move towards more unapologetic styles of campaigning, a less forgiving attempt at holding decision makers across the country to account. Some of that, of course, stems from an inherited feeling of being let down, which spans generations, and some of it is born, of course, of the democratization of voice. We have digital natives who understand the power they can wield from collective solidarity, and they will use it. You might be thinking some of this isn't new, of course, and you'd be right in saying that, but the hallmarks, of course, have always been there, but what has changed is the balance on who might be heard. Gone are the days when young people and young adults are just open to change. They want to be agitators of change too. And although, of course, this shows up differently, there's a renewed sense for using this wide access to information for good. So when I reflect on my journey back then, I was interested in bridging the gap between young people, and in particular young black men, and the police, because sadly, even at such a young age, I was acutely aware of the frayed relationship that ensued between the two. Many of the things I felt as a Gen Z change maker have only strengthened amongst younger Gen Zs. And the signs are there to illustrate that Gen Alpha may just be even more impassioned about social action. So how does Bite Back fit into this? So Bite Back is a movement of British teenagers campaigning for a food system to do better for the sake of children's health. In 2019, we formed Bite Back with a mission, a clear mission, a mission to open the eyes of the world to the failings of the food system, to make people pause for a second and wonder if the extraordinary rise in food-related ill health might be explained by the radical change by what surrounds us, and by the ceaseless efforts of industry to get us to all eat too much of what isn't good for us at every available opportunity and every place. A system that is driven almost entirely by profit and whose lack of responsible action is destroying the health of a generation. Today, we work with thousands of young people. It's really incredible. Thousands of young people across the world, led by a committed, outspoken, and talented group of 50 young activists. Because to really understand what we mean by a broken system means experiencing the world today as a young person does. Whilst we come from the UK, our issue is global. Across the world, food-related health conditions like type 2 diabetes and heart disease are on the rise. In the UK, a third of British children are now at the risk of having their lives cut short by food-related health conditions. When the issues remain so acute, you won't be surprised to know that hundreds of thousands of young people, when canvassed their opinion, they repeatedly choose health and well-being as their biggest priority. So what has become clear? Well, it's become clear that young people continue to speak out until we have a fairer, more equitable system. They'll continue to speak out until we have parity between physical and mental health. They'll continue to speak out until they see an end to discrimination that's so prevalent in our society. They'll continue to speak out until they see an end to child poverty. They'll continue to speak out until they see climate change or the climate emergency addressed appropriately. And this might be the point in the speech where you're expecting me to say now more than ever. It's not in there, but the sentiment is. And young people do care about society, and they want the brands that they engage with to be aware and think about their social impact too. So when we look to the moments where we've carved out time for young people, it serves to reiterate what many of us already know. When young people are given the right tools and the opportunity to take up space, they will speak out. And not only that, we know that when given the right opportunity to engage authentically, young people are articulate enough and passionate enough to speak about their lived experiences and, importantly, the solutions not only to the issues affecting them locally, but some of the biggest issues facing modern Britain. Many of you won't need me to tell you that the issues that young people face are often complex and, of course, often deep-rooted in social and economic issues. So when we reflect on young people's engagement with political and social change, we must reflect on the fact that they don't just want their opinions sought after and listened to, they expect action as well. Young people still aren't being given enough space. Young people still are told that they don't possess the range to take part. Some young people are prevented from taking part because, of course, of their financial circumstances. And whilst others are denied a shot because, of course, of the postcode lottery. But if there's one prevailing thought I want you to remember today, it's that often young people are thought of as the future. And of course, they are. But we must remind people that young people can and do actively contribute to society now, and we're richer for it. So if we want to produce a world that is kinder, more equal and fairer, we have to empower all young people, and of course, particularly young people of colour, LGBT youth, young women, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we know it can deliver change for everyone. Thank you.
Hi there.
Hello.
Are there any, thank you very much for that, by the way. Are there any brands that you think are doing a good job of sort of legitimately supporting and properly committing to youth activism, that, you know, bridging that gap between sort of disaffected youth that you're describing? You know, because I know a lot of young people that sort of feel like brands are almost like, you know, it's like trucking with the devil, saying you're going with the brand because they automatically think they're this corporate monolith, they're not going to support. But obviously brands can do a huge amount of good. So who do you think is doing a good job, if anyone?
Yeah, that's an interesting... I get asked that question quite a lot, actually. And my view is that I don't think there's anyone that there's a carbon copy for. I think it's really interesting to see some of the insights that came out of the Trends report about young people's behaviours towards brands who, for example, take climate seriously. It's really interesting to see some will say that they won't change their habits as a result of seeing kind of organizations that are doing better on the climate. And I think some of that is a kind of a self-awareness as well, that actually ultimately we live in this capitalist society. We're going to have to engage with some of these brands whether we like it or not. So for example, if I had the choice, there are some train services I'd never get on in this country, but ultimately sometimes I've got to go to Manchester, right? And so when I reflect on brands, there are a few that come to mind. So The Body Shop, who many of you might saw that had some difficulty early this year, but a good example of a brand that's not just kind of involved in social impact to increase sales, but you can tell there's something genuine behind that. And when you speak to young people about those sorts of partnerships, they can see through it. Young people are more savvy than ever before about brands, and they can see when something's cynical, and they can also see when actually there's no real passion in this. This is purely for sales. And I think that's one thing we have to be more aware of, is that actually young people are really willing to be a lot more critical. They're willing to look behind the scenes to really see what's authentic. So I wish I had a list of organizations, but honestly, I don't think I'd be doing it justice if I gave you that list, because I don't think there are many right now that are really engaging with young people that well. But that's my first example. Hopefully that was helpful. Any other questions?
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask what I've noticed is that within companies, there is a big difference between the senior leadership and the younger employees. So how do you think brands and corporates can do better from a senior leadership perspective to internally communicate and engage with younger voices? Because that often causes a lot of distress, because younger people want to be heard, but then there is ultimately this decision-making body who decides what the brand's outlook is going to be or how they internally communicate. So how do you think they can do better on that front?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I think you have to be systematic about it, and obviously that might feel like the obvious thing to say, but I think it starts with horizontal leadership, and I don't think we talk about this enough in the context of empowering staffers and people. Is actually there has to be a place for horizontal leadership. And what do I mean by horizontal leadership? I mean a space for an authentic space for even as junior employees to contribute towards the way that organization is running. And a good example of that is there's a few companies that actually have their own youth boards internally, and they're using that to generate ideas from young people, but also to make sure that they can say to young people, actually we take your views seriously, and this is going to link directly into the strategic decision making that we're making. So for me, it's kind of a real deliberate action, but that is about horizontal leadership. How can we look beyond the titles that are in the room to make sure that actually everyone can have an equitable contribution? And the second part to that is transparency. I think, again, gone are the days when people don't expect a level of transparency. And I think lots of organizations are kind of paying for that they've not got much transparency in their organizations. Decisions are made in a kind of hidden box over here. And I think younger employees are challenging those things. And one of the things that's interesting about that is I think those things are clear to people externally. So people might think, the internal politics of an office isn't clear to what's happening to young people. But actually, quite a lot of young people are, again, so savvy in the way that they engage with brands. One of the things that's really shocking about the work that we do at Bite Back is just how savvy young people are to branding, and how much they understand about, for example, child appealing tactics that food brands are using, all of these sorts of things that quite a lot of adults in society wouldn't have noticed at that age. They weren't able to not just understand their lived experience, but how it sits in the environment. And I think how we treat young people internally is a big part of that. So for me, the solution to that is horizontal leadership. Absolutely. Another question.
Hi, my name is Lucy and I work at Kids Know Best. And obviously we kind of focus on Generation Alpha coming through. So I thought it was really interesting that you also touched upon that as well. And we've actually started to see that a lot more children are taking a stance and kind of creating their own voice, even on places such as Roblox. And when thinking about kind of a lot more of AI coming through, even AI imagery that we're seeing online, how do you think the impact of that will be on the younger children taking a stance and kind of creating their own voice?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've talked about a lot through my career is the role that digital, whatever the digital solution is, but the role that digital can play in making things more accessible. So, for example, whenever I'm doing a talk that's about kind of anti-black racism or LGBT rights, one of the things I always talk about actually is this idea that so many things have been whitewashed through history. And one of the things that's kind of really changed the playing field is this access to information and access to empowering the way that you can think about things. And I think for me, that's the one thing that I think will absolutely change. When I spoke earlier, I said that whenever I talk about my history and that I launched the first campaign that I ever did on Sky News when I was 12, people look at me like I'm crazy and they expect that, no one else around you knew what I was talking about. And I tell them, no, that's not true. I had the opportunity and a platform and I used it, losing my voice. And I think for me, that's what I see AI playing a role in, is kind of broadening that access. And I think it's interesting. It's going to be a very powerful tool, I think, for campaigning. If you think about campaigning is sometimes quite unexciting, if I'm honest with you. So sometimes I think we glamorize campaigning, we glamorize kind of this influence, but actually behind all of that glamorization, quite often for the most vocal people, is a spreadsheet at 2 a.m. in the morning. I can't tell you how many times when I was at Pride in London as a director, volunteered and led a team of 45 volunteers. And actually, as much as I led an event that was for 1.5 million people, what kept me humble was that spreadsheet at 2 a.m. And so for me, it's like, actually, how do we, it's about productivity as well. So actually, how can we broaden access to the tools that we need to campaign and all those sorts of things? So I think that's what's going to be interesting to watch out, is how young people use those things. Particularly, I talk about young people being digital natives. Obviously, that applies to some Gen Zers as well, where digital isn't a second thought. I remember about 4 years ago, one of my best friends had a child, and she was barely even 2, and she took my phone and started scrolling through my pictures. And first I thought, excuse me, that's kind of rude. But it was so intuitive to her, and even for me, that felt alien, even though I've had a phone throughout all of my childhood as well. And I think for me, that's what's going to be interesting, is how it empowers campaigning. And I guess we've yet to see what the effects of that are properly. So that's my thought. I think there was a question at the back.
Firstly, yeah, thank you very much. I guess I want your thoughts on what the most important thing for a brand to do is for young people wanting to make a difference. Is it A, just ensuring they feel heard, or is it B, giving them tools for them to make change? Or should brands be going one step further and making the change on their behalf? What's the most powerful thing I think brands do?
Yeah, I think it's all three of those things. So I think I think it's difficult. I think one of the days when social impact was this arm's length thing. You just chuck some money at a charity and we're doing some great stuff. And I think, as I say, because young people are so savvy to brands, I think they can see that a mile off. They can see when you're just trying to do some nice thing that's going to look nice, but actually on paper, when you analyze it, isn't quite working. But I think I wouldn't be head of youth activism, or I wouldn't be a very good head of youth activism at Bite Back if I didn't tell you, actually, I think it's about empowering young people. I've worked in this space now for over a decade. And one of the things that's just so powerful about that is quite often when I speak to people who aren't in this space, they go, oh yeah, but everyone you work with, they just want to be the next prime minister, don't they? Not really, actually. Yes, there are a few. I can think of at least one. I'm looking at my team. I can think of one young person I work with who probably does want to be the Prime Minister. But for the rest of them, actually, they're just conscious of society and they want to contribute. And I think there is something powerful about empowering young people to get on and do the work for themselves. And I think that's how we ensure that one of the things I also talk about when I'm talking about anti-racism and particularly LGBT rights, where there's a lot of focus on visibility, I always say that actually visibility is on its own can be quite problematic because it enables someone else to speak for you. So here we have a lovely picture of some amazing young people, but we're going to annotate and speak on their behalf about what it is they can say. And as I said earlier, they're passionate enough and articulate enough to speak for themselves. So for me, my alignment and my passion is in saying we should allow young people to speak for themselves and not make assumptions about what it is that they can contribute to society. I think we've run out of time, but thank you so much. This has been amazing and thoughtful.